Welcome! I'm Wasabi, and today I am starting a new series to help myself improve at mini painting. I got into the mini painting hobby about 3 or 4 months ago, and I have absolutely fallen in love with it. It's such a great little hobby that occupies my time while binging podcasts or audiobooks or really any content that I've been meaning to catch up on. And as a new guy to the hobby, I have a long way to improve, and that's really the purpose of this series. Because I have absolutely zero artistic skill in general when it comes to visual art mediums, so this hobby really is the only time I've picked up a paintbrush since art class in middle school. On screen right now are some of the minis I've painted so far. I'm showing some of my favorite ones I've done, but trust me, not all have been successes. So the challenge I'm creating is called the Mini a Month Challenge. This doesn't mean I'll be literally doing a single mini a month, but rather more of a mini I paint on camera every month as a benchmark to see how far I've improved as time goes on. Sort of like before and after pictures people do of their bodies when they work out, but unlike my before and after pictures, which have become more of a slideshow of me getting fatter, I'm hoping this will actually be a slideshow of me improving. I want to attempt new techniques that I haven't even tried yet, from edge highlighting to freehanding to many more techniques. And hopefully, this is an easier beginner level challenge that others can take part in. So maybe set aside a mini you really like every month, and try this out yourself to see where you're at, and what you'd like to improve. So here's the mini for the day. This little skelly boy is from the Death Rattle Skeletons box for Age of Sigmar, who I'm gonna name Geoffrey. I grabbed these guys because I love the little personality each one has. They just look so happy to be raised up and ready to slaughter people in the name of their necromancer that you just can't help but be a little bit excited for them. My reason for painting this little guy, other than because he's adorable, is because my buddy is running my group through a Curse of Strahd game in September. And I thought it'd be really fun to paint up some skeletons, ghouls, and other creepy and fun minis for the game. I'm not big on 5e these days, but I am an absolute sucker for Curse of Strahd and its entire gothic horror vibe. And what better way to get excited for a brand new campaign than to paint up creatures that I hope to kill with my friends on the tabletop. Anyway, that's enough of me blathering, let's get painting. So the first thing we're going to do on Geoffrey here is the actual skeleton parts of the mini. So that's his skull just peeking beneath the helmet, his arms, legs, and hands. We're not going to worry too much about making mistakes here, because the great thing about this early process is that everything you accidentally paint is getting painted over anyway later on, so feel free to be sloppy as long as you make sure to get the hard to reach bone parts. So you might be wondering why I'm not using a bone white, or perhaps even a beige for this section, and the truth is I don't actually have any bone whites or beiges, and out of the 2 whites I do have, this one will do the trick just fine. Because a bit later on, I'm going to slap a wash onto the bone parts to give it a darker and proper grimy look, and it's going to look just fine. Now, this isn't a tutorial by any means, but if you end up feeling inspired to paint your own Skelly Boy from this video, and you're not sure which paint to use, my advice is just to use the best paint, which is whatever paint you currently have on hand. That's why I'm using Vallejo's Ivory White paint. I also own Citadel's Corax white paint, and not only do I prefer the dropper bottles over the pots, I just find the Corax white is really clumpy and more of a pain to use than the Ivory white. But if all you have is the Corax white, then use it. It'll still get the job done, you might just need to do a bit more shaking or just use a bit more, but it'll be fine. So next, we start getting into the really fun stuff. So I saw this bottle of Vallejo's Gunmetal Blue at my local hobby shop last week, and I knew before I even knew what mini I was painting for this video that it was going to get used. The camera really doesn't do it justice, but this deep blue has this really nice sheen to it. And honestly, as I was applying this onto Geoffrey's armor, helmet, and mace and sabatons, I was starting to think maybe he isn't just any old skeleton warrior. So, I'm big into game mastering, and it's hard for me to ever turn my GM brain off. Whenever I'm watching a movie or playing a video game, I am constantly thinking to myself, ooh, that'd make a good enemy, or that's a great premise for a scenario. And mini painting is honestly no different. Whenever I am painting my minis, I try to decide what kind of story they're a part of. Geoffrey here is definitely not your average shambling skeleton who will go down in the first round. He's got a matching collector's set of some snazzy gear, and he's not going to let go of it easily. That orc head at his feet should be warning enough to most adventurers what happens if you mess with Geoffrey, but honestly, adventurers have never been known for their caution. In any case, same as before, we aren't too worried about making mistakes just yet, as we still have a lot of work ahead of us. In retrospect, I probably should have started with the harder to reach places first, such as the back of the shield area, but once I'm committed, I just have to keep going and deal with the consequences later. Thankfully, Geoffrey here is overall a fairly easy mini to paint. He has just enough detail to be great fun, without having so much detail that it becomes a pain in the ass. I love my Caradron Overlord dwarves. but it's gonna be a while before I can bring myself to do any more tiny mechanical parts. Also, if you notice any weird editing or parts completed on the Mini that aren't shown, it's mostly because this is my first time painting a Mini on camera, and a few times while getting in the zone, I completely forgot to paint in frame, so when I do things off camera, I'll mention it and what I did. As this series progresses, I'll be getting a proper setup and better gear so I can more easily show the process. And I might even mini paint live on Twitch at some point, so if you'd like to see that, be sure to comment below and follow me over there. So next up for our snazzy undead friend here is his Cloak Shield. I'm using Citadel's Screamer Pink because I have no idea how colors or matching work, so I just normally go with my gut on colors and hope it works out for the best. And honestly, somehow, it usually does. So I hope you're ready for more random tangents that somehow rope back into being about mini painting while I paint this little guy, because there's more to come. So before I started working at my current job, I used to be a cook. Now I loved culinary school as it was an absolute blast for a kid who just came out of high school having no clue what they wanted to do with their life, but when I got out and went into the real world, did I ever not realize what I signed up for. Terrible hours, insane coworkers, crazy customers, and it was fun for a while, but ultimately I quit that world and joined a much more boring one. But during those few years I spent as a cook, I learned to not second guess myself too much. Because when you're on the line and you need to get stuff out or need to whip up a new dish because somebody has an allergy to the regular special, or whatever the case may be, time is of the essence. So at this point, you're probably wondering what the hell this has to do with mini painting, because this sounds pretty much like the complete opposite of this hobby's experience. And sure, I don't have a steel pan flying a foot from my head by a raging head chef while I'm painting, and yeah, that actually happened, but I'll reserve cooking stories for a different time. But there are some fundamental similarities. These days, I don't have a lot of time to just sit and mull over what paint schemes I'm going to do, or what mini I need to paint next, especially if I'm doing it for a video. So just like in cooking, I experiment. I throw things together and see what works and what doesn't for next time, and what's even better is that this hobby is way more forgiving. If you don't like a color, you can either strip it off or paint over it. In this case, I think the Screamer Pink worked out pretty nice. Geoffrey here is turning to quite the sharp dresser, and we're only about halfway done. So I guess what I'm saying in a long and drawn out way is to make sure to try things out and get out of your comfort zone, and you might end up with some really rad shit. Oh, and if you want a quick tip on how to seem like a way better cook than you actually are, just get to know your spices. If you know how to use spices properly, that's like 70% of cooking right there. So at this stage, the robe is pretty much done, and we'll revisit it later. So it's time to move on to the shield. I was considering making the shield a totally different color from the rest of his outfit, but then I kind of liked the look of the mace matching the armor, and the robe matching the shield. Normally I do somewhat more muted colors for my minis, which you might not think seeing all the golds and silvers I use on the minis I showed at the beginning, but if you look at the other colors I use, they tend to be darker blues and greens and purples, and I wanted to use these brighter colors to really separate Geoffrey from the other 19 minis that came in the box. And so if you guys have any color scheme suggestions for his undead buddies, I'd love to hear them. Now that we have the big parts dealt with, we can start getting into the nitty-gritty details. First, we're using Vallejo bronze to do Geoffrey's little chainmail skirt, the rim and spike of his shield, his helmet, and parts of his mace. There really aren't many parts of Geoffrey left unpainted. We only have 2 more sections after this one. I grabbed this bronze the same day I grabbed the gunmetal blue. Though my Citadel paints collection still vastly outnumbers my Vallejo collection, I don't know how long that'll be the case for. Though I really like Citadel's paints, and the container they come in may be super cute, they are just really inefficient. I know this isn't exactly breaking news to anyone, but I thought I would just pile in with everybody else that I'd at least like Citadel paints in a dropper bottle as an option. Because having a decent amount of paint squeezed out of the sides of the pot is just really infuriating. I know there's a way to get around it, but I'm a lazy person, and Vallejo paints are just pretty deadly, so I'm just gonna go with those more often. So next we have Mournfang Brown. I don't know if you can say that name with a straight face. I actually ended up looking up what a Mournfang was, and honestly, it's exactly what I was expecting it to be, and it is actually brown. Anyway, I saved you a Google search. You're welcome. Back to Geoffrey, we're doing the sheath for his dagger and the straps on his back that keep his armor attached to him, and I'm actually realizing as I do that, his back is fully exposed. Geoffrey may be a fashionable lad, but it doesn't seem like he cares much for practicality. Perhaps an adventuring party sent to retrieve the bedazzled skeleton's loot could use that to their advantage. Though if I were those adventurers, I wouldn't get too cocky. See, the thing about all skeletons is that they have weapons on their back. You really have to be careful for their shoulder blades. I was originally going to apologize for that joke, but honestly, screw that. That was gold, and you know it. Alright, moving on to the last paint of the video before we get to our washes and dry brushing, we have Lead Belcher Silver. We're going to apply the silver to the shaft of the mace, the details on the shield, and later edge highlight the chest piece and sabatons just a little bit to give that armor a nice weathered look. Also, between this section and the next section, I started on the base and got that orc head going. Everything is really starting to come together on this guy. If you've made it this far in the video, I encourage you to stick around to the end, because once I am done with this little guy, I'll show 3 options for you guys to vote on to see what mini I should paint next month. Okay, so now we are using Reikland Flesh Shade on all the exposed bone parts. Though it does make a difference to use better bone colors, I think I was able to get the intended grimy effect with the combination of this paint plus wash combo. There aren't a whole lot of exposed areas, so this section is done in just a few seconds. After Geoffrey's bones are looking properly dirty, we'll move on to the armor, weapons, and clothing. We'll be using 2 washes here. For all the metallic parts of his clothing, we're using the Nuln Oil Gloss. I find it gives all the metallic parts a nice sheen. After all, we're going to make him look dirtier in the dry brushing section, so we want to make sure Geoffrey is still sparkling by the time we're done. And for his pink robes and belts, we're just using regular old Nuln Oil. In retrospect, I probably would have been a bit more stingy with the Nuln Oil, as it darkened his robe a bit more than I wanted, but I can always brighten that up with some highlighting in the future if I feel like it. Now, with the mini all properly doused in Nuln Oil, we'll move on to the last section. So finally, I'm using more of Vallejo Ivory to dry brush the mini. I quite like using white for dry brushing, as I find it tends to do a good job of separating different pieces of the model while also making them look a bit dusty as well. Now I did make a mistake here. One problem with the white for dry brushing is that sometimes it can be hard to tell how much is left on your brush. So I had quite a bit too much white paint on my brush when I did the helmet and chest piece, and I did correct that before dry brushing the rest of the model. But then I also went back after and cleaned up the helmet and chest piece so there wasn't quite so much white pigment all across the front of his body. And there we have it. This is Geoffrey. He looks excited to tackle any obstacles in his way, and I'm sure he'll crush anybody with that mace of his. With this model, I didn't do anything too crazy, because I want this to be a bit of a benchmark for where my skill level is currently. Now obviously, there's a long way to go before I become any kind of master at this, but I'm hoping the more of these I do, the more positive change we'll see. So now it's time to pick what mini is getting painted next. I'll tally up the votes in a week, and whichever one wins is what I'll be doing next episode. So first we have A, my dwarf cleric that my buddy 3D printed for me from Hero Forge. This will be my character for the upcoming Curse of Strahd campaign, a cleric of neutrality who follows no god, but rather a creed of principles and ideals. Next we have B, a Stormcast Eternal Annihilator from the Dominion box set. I haven't painted any of these guys yet, so this model could determine what the rest of the models from the box set are going to look like. Or C, a mystery mini that I will reveal in the next video. The only hint I'll give as to what the mini is that's definitely a creation of chaos. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.